I'm Tricia Christensen, and I'm a member of Christ Church, and it's wonderful to see everyone here. This is our fourth in our fall speaker series. We have started this as a community outreach from our church to the community, and it's wonderful to see everybody here. We've had other speakers. If you've been here, you know we had a woman in particle physics, Supreme Court Justice expert. Thank you, Barbara Creed was here. And we have more planned for the spring. So two little teasers I'll tell you that the committee's working on right now, but two that we know we're going to do. One speech on or event on AI in ethics and religion. Another, we're very excited, one of the owners of the new Alpine Inn Rosati's restaurant is going to come and talk to us about what that experience was like, taking old Alpine Inn and moving it into the new Alpine Inn. So that'll be a fun one. So watch your email if you get our emails, or watch the PB forum if that's how you find out about what we're doing, but I encourage you to get our emails. And I will say that I'll put in a plug. We would love to see you on Sunday morning if you ever want to come and join us for church. The sermons are amazing. So, anyway, I do want to introduce my good friend, Courtney Pflaum. Courtney and I have known each other since our children were babies, and Courtney's children are here. So we became friends because we were in the Mommy and Me group that is here. And we have done a lot of different things together. You have spoken, I think, all over the world about wine, if that's correct, if I'm correct on that. And it's just such a pleasure to have someone who took an idea, made it into something much bigger, and is now able to share it with all of us. And I have to tell you, I do have one funny story. I always try to make something personal in my introductions. Courtney, I think, knows this story. I went to a friend's house who's very particular about wine. And I walked in with my bottle of Kingston Vineyards, and I said, here's a bottle of wine. My friend's family, it's their family wine, and it's from Chile. And he took it, and he said, thank you, and he put it over to the side.
No.
I know, and he didn't serve it that night. Well, 2 weeks later, he called me, and he said, I have to apologize to you, because I thought when you said your friend's wine from Chile, it was not going to be very good. Well, he then opened it when he was alone in his house, and he realized how amazing it was. And he said, I'm so sorry that I didn't serve your friend's Chilean wine when you were at my house for my dinner party. So that's my little story. One last thing I realized I didn't ever say, there are bathrooms right across here. Just go through this door, and there are a couple bathrooms if you need to use the bathroom. Otherwise, we hope to see you after this. We hope to see you at Christmas time if you want to come back, or in the spring. So, Courtney, take it away.
This is just such a delight. We thought maybe 10 to 15 people. So what an honor. I'm actually known as Courtney Pflaum to some, because my kids and my husband's are all husband. And my father-in-law are all known as Pflaums. I also go by Courtney Kingston, because I'm vain. And if somebody says, well, how did you know the Kingston family? I want them to know that I know the Kingstons quite well. So this is just such a joy to be here. My husband and I have lived in the Portola Valley community now for almost 25 years. And actually in line with my journey with my family's business. So I just want to give you a sense of what to expect this evening. Hello, welcome. I'm gonna talk for maybe about 20 minutes is the idea. Share enough fodder for conversation. And then we'll do fun Q&A for another 20, 25 minutes. So we're starting just a little bit late, but we hope to get you out of here by 8:15 at the latest, if that sounds good. Please continue to enjoy these amazing hors d'oeuvres, thanks to Ruth Ann and Chantal. They are really, it's just fabulous. So we designed this to be a living room with fireplace and all. So we want you to feel comfortable to get up, go try a different wine, try another hors d'oeuvre. Please don't feel, this is not a lecture. This is a dialogue, okay? And in the back corner there, just so you know, in the business, in the wine business, in the industry, we always have a dump bucket. And that's how we are able to drive home safely. So we're frequently tasting different wines and then pouring out the glass. So there is a glass of water over there and I've never seen such a nice dump bucket. It has holly around it, thanks to Chantal. And you can rinse your glass and then try. So we've also got rosés, some Syrahs. They're all from Kingston, but there's some really special bottlings there, including our top wine called Portola Valley, which is part of our Black series, and another top wine. So enjoy. With that, I'm just gonna point over here in the corner. Oops, I'm not ready to switch.
Oh, you know.
I just have a couple notes here in case I was quite nervous. The funny thing is that I actually talk a lot to groups, as Trisha said, but this feels very personal. It's in my own community. You all are my people. And so I really want to do a good job. So that's what my notes are for. But hopefully we'll just all relax and have a nice time. This is a mini video that my niece Hannah Kingston put together. She works full-time down in Casablanca, just to transport us all down to Chile before we start. Our family today hosts guests. We host over 7,000 guests a year by word of mouth only, primarily by appointment, for half-day food and wine experiences. So it is really a delight to welcome people to our farm. Coincidentally, being a Stanford alum, we also call our family's estate the farm. And we even have an entry when you come in that is a palm tribe. It's quite striking. So that is not imitation is the best form of flattery, but also just a fun reference back to Stanford. All right, well, why don't we go to the first old picture. We're going to go from here to way back in time, actually, if we can. Also, huge thanks to our AV team, aka Angela. So people often, hear my name, Courtney Kingston, and they look at me and they say, well, they actually don't usually say it. Oh, thank you. They just think it, and they say, Chile? Could that be possible? How does that happen? My great-grandparents emigrated from the US, like many people have been thinking of doing in the last couple of years. My great-grandparents emigrated from Brooklyn and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the early 1900s to Chile. And so that's how my family has been farming in the Casablanca Valley now for over 100 years. This is just a fun old picture. I think we were apparently one of the, this was high technology in the 40s on our farm. My great-grandparents basically thought that there was gold in the Casablanca Valley. My great-grandfather was a mining engineer. He went to college at the Michigan School of Mines in the Upper Peninsula, which today has rebranded itself wisely as Michigan Tech. Go Huskies. And they thought that there was gold in Casablanca and basically made a small investment in this very rural area and ended up as the suckers on the deal, and ended up with some land, an old house, and some cows. That's how we ended up the collateral on their investment. And so my father and my grandfather and my aunts and uncles were all born and raised in Chile. They would come to the States because both my great-grandparents were Americans. They would send their kids to the States for college, and then one family member per generation would go back and run the farm. So I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, because my dad came to the U.S. from Chile, went to Princeton, and fell in love with my mom. He was mowing lawns to help pay for his college tuition. And my first time in Chile, I was 20. It was for thesis research in college, and it's amazing to me that it is such a central part of my life. But as American as I look and sound from Portola Valley, my uncle is Enrique Allende, my cousins are Trinidad, Isabel, Rebecca. We're puro chileno norteamericano, so we're mezclado, as we say. Chileans like to drop their S's a lot. So I'm fourth generation, and I'm fortunate enough to have our 3 daughters here today, where's Ruth Ann?
She's right there.
Ruth Ann, they didn't make it for the bell choir, but they're here tonight. And they're so happy to get to see you. They sang in the choir with Ruth Ann when they were growing up, and Caroline, and my husband Andy is here too, and as well as my father and mom. So Chile is a long, skinny country. Who's been? Can you guys raise hands? Okay, just a small, that's great. It is like California on steroids. It's as if somebody stretched it, but almost like bubble gum. They didn't pull it at the sides. So you know how it's 3.5 hours to Tahoe here. In Chile, it's 45 minutes to ski. And then similar to us right here, it's only, an hour, half an hour, actually half an hour to the coast from where we are. So muy parecido to this where we live here. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why I loved the Bay Area, was it reminded me of Chile. And there is a reason, by the way, while some of you may live on Valparaiso in Atherton, or Santiago, there was a big trade before the Panama Canal between Valparaiso, Chile, and all the way up to San Francisco. So long history there. So how did we go from cows to Pinot Noir? I'm going to talk a little bit about our family's reinvention in the last 30 years. If my uncle were here, he'd tell you about his role 40 years before that, and my grandfather, he would share his story as well, but I feel the most comfortable talking about this. By the way, Chantal originally marketed our talk as Women in Winemaking, and I laughed. I said, well, I can talk about one woman in winemaking, but I do not feel equipped to talk about all women in winemaking. So today I'm telling you about a study of one woman in winemaking. What I want you to take from this one slide are the ups and downs and the resilience and reinvention over the 30 years that I have been fortunate enough to bear witness. And don't worry, if the font's too small, I'm going to talk about it. But we originally went from cows to Pinot Noir. That was my first thing. I was at Stanford Business School, and I'm sure you all had this experience in your college or graduate school experiences where they basically say, do an independent project. Focus, try to bring together everything that you've done. And that was in the early mid-90s. And our farm at that time, we had been in dairy. And that had been a business that my grandfather and my uncle had grown quite successfully. But it was commodified. And it actually kind of looks like that. We were at the end of a whiplash of the price. Chile is actually very competitive on the global market. Maybe you've heard about it in the news. Sometimes it's a neoliberal model. It's a very focused on the global economy, but it's only a country of 20 million people. So it means that we can kind of get thrown around a bunch when the Kiwis start setting the price of milk. So what I was trying to do was, okay, well, what could we think of differently that would complement, hi Kathy, welcome, that would complement, not at all, the dairy business. And there were some hills that the cows didn't like. And meanwhile, my first job out of college was working for Deloitte and in the wine industry. Coincidentally, it was probably the worst project I worked on in my 3 years working for Deloitte, because my manager was a woman, and I was so excited to have my first female manager, and she was terrible. Her last name was Dice, and we called her Ice Dice Baby. Not to her face. But it was a traumatic project, but I learned the ins and outs of the wine industry, and particularly why people make a small fortune in the wine industry by starting with a large one. That is true.
Yeah.
I can tell you, having been the data analyst behind a big benchmarking study of 300 wineries in Northern California, that is true. It is rough out there. And so it's a good idea to invent the stent first and then go into wine. And that was not what we had in Chile. My family didn't invent the stent. We had some land that we loved deeply. We had cows. And we had a place that where my father was growing up was 5 hours to Santiago. Now they had put 2 tunnels through these passes, and it was now 1 hour. And so things were starting to change. The flights that I would take to Chile, I could always buy seat 31G, which is like middle, right? Like when you get that seat now, you're like, oh, it's a 9.5 hour red eye from Dallas, both ways. But I would get 31G because there was nobody in H or I or J or K. Like I had the whole row. That's not the case anymore. Chile is an adventure travel destination, and I highly, highly encourage you all to go. It is a beautiful country, and with, again, think California, but the volume's been turned up to 11. So it is not only do you have the dramatic from east to west, from north to south. You go from all the way leaving for Antarctica, all the way up to Patagonia, the Lake District, the metropolitan area where we are, which is very much like Portola Valley, Santa Cruz Mountains, and you continue up to the Atacama Desert and an oasis. It's just stunning. So we were looking at how we could extend from and differentiate into new businesses, and there were some hills that the cows didn't like. And when I worked on that benchmarking study for Deloitte, the only people who were making money, does anybody want to guess?
Winemakers.
The bottles.
Some,
With the bottles.
they were independent vineyards growing, this was 1993, so it changes. Independent vineyards growing Pinot Noir on the coast. And I was like, I wonder why that is. Pinot Noir, for those, I'm sure many of you are wine people, so I might not be teaching you anything here, but Pinot Noir is nicknamed the heartbreak grape. It is the ultimate wine that can differentiate because it speaks of a place. It's actually very hard to make large scales of Pinot Noir. You can really only do it well in small volumes. Chile has made its name in the world by making really good wines for value. But they're the wines that you might bring on a Tuesday night, right? Not the one you want to bring to your boss's house, which is why your friend thanked you graciously and put the bottle away, right? So they're the U.S. term is cheap and cheerful. Another term for Chile, we call it bueno, bonito y barato, which is good, cheap, and pretty. Affordable and pretty. So good wines, right? But we were trying to figure out how could we make a small amount of something, but that could be exceptional. And that could really, how could we be like those small Pinot Noir vineyards on the coast? So that's how things got started. I'm gonna break briefly. Andy was like, break briefly for questions. Any questions before I continue on? Yeah.
Tell me how the movie Sideways affected your business.
Oh my gosh. I still feel badly for Merlot
I
producers.
know.
So Sideways came out in Chile. It was called Entre Copas. Came out in 97, 98, I think. This was a movie, for those who haven't seen it, that was all about Pinot Noir. And in fact, it put Pinot Noir on the map. Before that, Pinot Noir was sort of, and back then, wine was so snooty, right? Like it was this aspirational good, but that was really kind of pretentious, and that it was not accessible. And I think Sideways made wine more accessible, and in particular, it made Pinot Noir more accessible. So that's how. Any other question before I go on? All right. So our first vintage, so we planted our Pinot Noir. We were not going to get into making our own wine because I looked at all those numbers of those winemakers, Casey, and I was like, no way. These guys have to invest in a lot of equipment that they get to use once a year. Then they have to get into like consumer packaged goods, packaging, marketing, sales, right? Retail, distribution, all of that stuff. And I was like, well, let's stick to what we know. We're grape growers. This is a big extension already from the cows. So our first vintage of Pinot Noir, I was all excited. I thought like the Sonoma Coast, I was gonna have like 7 different flying winemakers lining up to buy our grapes, and no one cared. No one cared. It's great to be ahead of the market, unless there is no market, unless you're so far ahead. I have a friend who owns Buy Right Market in San Francisco. I don't know if you guys know Buy Right. And he tells a funny story. Buy Right is very successful in San Francisco, particularly in their revenue per square foot. It's just like off the charts. And he tells a funny story about how in 1993, he tried to, long before he started Buy Right, he tried to sell carrot juice for $7.99 in San Francisco. You know, just a thing of carrot juice. No one was paying $7.99 for carrot juice in San Francisco. And his point was, now they pay for my carrot juice. But he was so ahead of the market, there was no market. So we realized pretty quickly that we needed to make a small amount of wine, back to you, Casey, as a prototype. And so that's what we did, was we made a very small amount of wine, and that's what we do today, actually. We grow more grapes than we make wine. We make very small amount of wine. Most of the bottles that you see here, we do about 100, 200 cases of each of them. And what's also dramatically changed is that we have extended from wine into hospitality. So remember I mentioned that flight, you know, where I used to lie down, and now the flights are full. The other thing that happened was very early on, we were fortunate enough to have some great success, very lucky in terms of the quality of our wines and the recognition we got. Back then it was Wine Spectator and Robert Parker were the rainmakers. Today, thankfully, it's much more peer-to-peer and what you think and you read about what others think. There's not one person that says, I am the light, I am the way. So we were written up in Food and Wine and Wine Spectator and the like. And do you guys remember it was called TomTom or Garmin? It was early GPS.
Yeah.
And people started finding us. And I'll never forget, my father and my dad, by the way, I still get to work with my dad every day. He's 85, still our CFO, who I learn a ton from. But my dad and I were in the old house, which was from the late 1800s, having lunch. And my dad said, there's someone in the garden. Do you know who that is? I don't know. And we went out and they said, we tried your wine at Masa in New York City or at Aqua in San Francisco or, Boulevard or what have you. We just wanted to experience it and come there and be there. And that started happening more and more. And so that is how the business has evolved today, that what we do is we welcome guests for experiences, whether it's a 5-course wine-paired lunch, whether it's a cooking class. They're almost all connected to the land, the experiences that we offer to what we do. but it is fabulous. And then the US guests, about 60% of our guests are American, probably because we're an American-Chilean family. For the US and the Chilean guests, we ship directly to their home. So our wines are primarily sold direct to consumer. And I thought I'd put up a slide here. I'm sorry that this is small, but I'm gonna sort of gesticulate a little bit because I think you might find this interesting.
My points.
Oh yeah, I forgot I had a pointer. Oh, you can point.
I was going to say, I can point because you can go.
Yeah, I just want to get out of your way. I don't want to block your way. So what we have here, and this is a little bit, so Stanford Business School has written a couple case studies on our business and how we started a small business in an industry of giants and how we compete. And one of the things that we do, since we make only 2,000 cases a year and we sell 95% direct, the other, by the way, 5% is Bianchini's Market in the meat section. Because I'm able to go, that's where I shop. So living in Ladera, I can go in there and I can replenish that stash in a few restaurants in San Francisco. On the left side here, we have, I call it traditional distribution. So here is a bottle of wine, and basically for an imported bottle of wine, I thought you might find it interesting to know that less than 20% of that bottle, of the value of that bottle, goes to the winery that made that wine. And that is partly because of legacy of prohibition that we have in the US, what we call the 3-tier distribution through channels. So you sell, you can see there's the winery there at the bottom, and then you have an importer and they mark it up, and then you have a distributor in a state and they mark it up, and then you have the retailer and they mark it up. These, by the way, these parties are not evil people. They're just doing their job, right? Which is to buy and resell, buy and resell. And that's how most wine gets to most people across the country. That is tough to compete as a small guy, really tough. And because most of the value there is in the channel. So that's why you end up, by the way, if you're ever buying wine, let's say even at Bianchini's or Whole Foods or Costco, most of the value of what you're buying is going to the people that are passing it along, not to the producer. So one of the things that we grew up with a motto in our family, which is don't bet the farm. Which is a very simple motto, but it's a very powerful one, and you'd be surprised how I use it almost daily when making decisions about what we will do and what we won't do. This model on the left is betting the farm. We can't compete with that. Because we can't make hundreds and thousands. You can do that model if you make millions of bottles. So that is a very successful model for brands like Kendall Jackson, Mondavi, Gallo. It really works well because you are doing high volume, lower margin. What smaller producers like Kingston, like maybe your favorite small Santa Cruz Mountain, Neely probably, producers do, is direct to consumer sales. And that's the bottle on the right. So the first thing to note, they actually can give you benefits like free shipping or discount if you're joining their club. So you can see there that the price is actually they're able to give you more value. And then the winery is actually to have a more sustainable business. And the only costs there are the import costs, which, by the way, are a little higher now. So I just thought that was an interesting thing to share and hopefully help you guys understand. Any questions about that?
And for those of us who don't have spyglasses, can you just say what the words are on the different color stripes on the right?
On the right, the Kingston, the direct-to-consumer model?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we'll start from the bottom. So the bottom is cost to make better wine.
Thank you.
Right? So we can invest more in the quality of the wine. Then we have a profit, which, by the way, we use to reinvest. All of our family members are volunteers. And in fact, our only employees are in Chile. And the quality of the jobs that we provide is one of the things we're most proud of what we do. Then there's the import cost. We don't have any, we are actually our own importer. If you look on the back of a bottle of Kingston wine, it'll say imported by Kingston Family Vineyards, LLC, Portola Valley. That used to be our house. Andy actually, when we first moved in, we had to hang up a sign.
I remember that.
Yes, one of these black and white signs they put in front of restaurants that say, you know, what is it, licensed to
Yes.
sell alcoholic beverages.
There was a big brouhaha.
And there was a
in
big
Ladera.
brouhaha. Andy got pulled in front of the Ladera Community Association to say, we're not opening a speakeasy. This is just so Courtney can talk on the phone or the internets about wine. So import cost, and then the last is benefits or savings, but you know, your price is lower. So, you know, when you do get a bottle at another place, there is markup there.
Courtney, what's the model in Europe, like the French wines and the Italian wines?
You know, I don't know because actually we don't sell to Europe, so I haven't dealt with it that much, but I don't think they don't have this strict 3-tier, but they're of course still an importer, right? And then sometimes the importer is usually they specialize in that and they're not always the distributor. So they're probably 2 players is my guess, unless they're doing what we would call a direct import. Sometimes you can see like K&L. Do any of you guys buy wine at K&L? They do a terrific job. I highly recommend K&L and rest in peace Beltramos. They will do direct imports, and so they can give you a better price on their what they call DIs. And so they take out the distributor and they'll have just their importer cost.
So the very bottom portion, the gray,
Yes,
you indicated
that's-
that you can invest more.
exactly.
So what does that involve?
Well, it can involve all sorts of things. It can involve farming organically and sustainably, which can be more expensive, interestingly. It can involve the quality of the aging that we use, the quality of the barrels or the materials that we use. It can involve the quality of the cork. How do we pay our people a sustainable wage? It also involves, you know, like actually for us, because we import our wines ourselves, we import in refrigerated containers. Most containers going from from the South America, New Zealand, Chile to the US are not insulated. And interestingly, I thought, oh, the risk is the equator. So let's just throw a blanket over that thing and it'll be fine. Not so much. We actually put little temperature monitors in there. And the one time, because everyone was like, everyone does it, everyone ships without a refrigerated container. And I was horrified by what happens at the port. It's always summer somewhere, and there's always a strike somewhere. You'd think it's the Chileans, but remember our own strike here in Oakland? So various things along the way allow us to reinvest and that can impact the quality.
You skipped a step. I should have asked the question at the first break, but can you explain what you did and how your business plan at the business school impacted the transition? Because it seemed to me, as I just read the little paragraph, that was a pivot point.
Yeah, you mean the case itself?
Well, either you wrote a case or
They wrote a case on us.
I thought you did a business plan.
Yes.
While you were, that's what I'm talking about, not their case.
Yes, but the
your
original business plan, yeah.
And how that was a pivot point.
That was a key point. That was how we made the decision to plant the first grapevines. And the biggest deal, because I live in Portola Valley, and my partner in crime was my brother Tim, 6 years older than me. The most important thing was for us to convince my uncle, who ran, and still does, is just now transitioning out, runs our farm, that this was interesting. It was a massive leap from dairy to wines. And a little tidbit or vignette is that originally, our original strategy when I was writing the business plan was to partner with a California winery. There was so much technical knowledge that we didn't have, and that's one thing I like about our family is We know what we know, we know what we don't know. I mean, I'm a big fan of fake it till you make it, but at some point you just really gotta know what you don't know. So we actually were in extended conversations with Kendall Jackson to partner, where they were bringing their technology, their knowledge, not technology, their knowledge about soil and where to plant and what varieties and what to do. And we were providing the on-the-ground know-how. In the final hour, literally like initialing the MOU, the memorandum, Jess Jackson wanted to go from a joint venture to have majority control. And that triggered the don't bet the farm.
We're not gonna do that.
Right. So we took their plan, and his team were chagrined that he had changed his mind at the last minute. So, and we had gotten to know them. They gave us all the due diligence, which was lovely. And we went and shrunk it down to something that we independently as a family could afford. At that time, I hadn't met Andy. Both my brother and I were single, working really long hours and earning money that we were saving. And so we shrunk it down to something that we could start small as our nest egg. And we took that formality actually of the negotiation with a third party to really kick the tires in having a good agreement of what I'll say the legacy family owners, and when new money was needed for this investment. Because with a grapevine, by the way, if you don't know, it is you plant your first vines and you have absolutely no grapes, nothing to sell for 3 years, and it's not mature for 5 years. It is the antithesis of the dairy business, which is the cash cow, right? It literally is. If the price of milk is good, you're milking all the time. So it was a big switch. So that business plan originally had us just growing grapes, not selling to independent winemakers. And that is on a part of the farm that the cows didn't like. We were not threatening the core business. We were building something else that could happen if it happened in parallel, and that was important.
So say something about the vines. How did you select the vines that you planted? How long did these particular vines in this area last? Sort of talk about the vines.
Yeah, great. So we basically worked a lot with UC Davis and ONTAV in Europe. And we did a combination of importing. We had to import little test tube babies. Chile is very serious about their agriculture contribution to their economy. And so when you come, you'll have all sorts of very cute dogs walk up to you at the airport and smell that banana, and that's it for the banana. So we worked with those two nurseries, imported directly, and then grew them. It was really a long-term play, and also did field cuttings that had adapted locally. And that's something we continue to do. That's another example of research and development, where you're always trying to learn more about what is making the most expressive, pure, most interesting wines. Yeah, there was a question.
Yeah, so it sounds like originally it was a dairy farm with some grapes on the side. Has it flipped now? Is it much more a wine operation than a vineyard? And is there still dairy?
Yes, there's still dairy. This is the business my uncle still runs, and I've just joined the board. We have, I think right now the number is probably about 4,000 dairy, but only 2,000 being, nursing at one time. So the others are others, and we have beef cattle. The pressure on that business is growing, you can imagine. In many ways, I think of where we are as a little bit like Portola Valley or West Marin, probably in the 40s. And so actually I really appreciate talking to Ward and Mary Payne about post And I'm really interested in learning about protecting open space and how we can be thoughtful about it. Our total farm property is about 3,000 hectares, which is about 8,000 acres. And that's just because in 1900 whatever, that's what there was. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'm thrilled to hear that you still have the dairy going.
Yeah. So, but we're we have a full-time person whose job is just environmental sustainability and making sure that we are doing the right thing for the land, for the animals, and for the community. Yeah.
So what do you do with the remainder of the wine that you're not turning into wine, the grapes that you're not turning into wine?
Oh, we
Sorry.
sell them to other people, and in fact,
in Chile?
Sorry?
In Chile?
Yes. I was originally, my early model was flying winemakers. It's funny how many models you have as a fellow entrepreneur that you're like, you were gonna do what? But I had this vision that we would FedEx a ton of grapes. And one of my first clients was Andy Erickson, who was a winemaker. His wife is Annie Favi, and they make Favi, and he was at Screaming Eagle and a couple other places. And I was gonna FedEx him a ton of grapes, but then I realized it was the same price for the FedExing as it was to, and you had some quality issues there. But what we do today is we actually grow enough grapes to make like 55,000 cases. We only make 2. And those other wines, we actually work with different winemakers who we're fortunate enough who line up to work with our wines. And in fact, our wines are a little bit like, remember Harry Met Sally in that scene in the restaurant? When they're like, I want what she's having. That's our marketing strategy.
So what's the acreage split between the cows and the grapes?
Well, the cows, for those who have nursed, you're not really moving around a lot. You're nursing a lot, right? So the dairy don't move around a lot. The beef cattle do. We've about the same head of beef cattle. So they move around, and in fact, they eat the leftovers. In the dairy business, you spend a lot of money on the quality of the food for the nursing dairy cow. And then the beef cattle eat the leftovers. So they're very symbiotic. And so the beef cattle need a little bit more space, but not too much. We like Portola Valley. We have a lot of hills. We recently have been evaluating renewable energy, solar. We're always looking at different thoughtful ways that we could balance basically something that's sustainable and that also has a long eye to the long term. Yeah.
So you've obviously got the wine thing down, you've got the dairy history.
I don't know if we have it down. We're working on it. Thank you.
You got the dairy history. Where's the cheese business plan?
Well, the funny thing is that I just want to check my time to make sure I'm not keeping you guys too long. When Jim and I proposed, my brother and I proposed this idea of the vineyard to the family, my Uncle Peter said, just not another cheddar cheese business. And the reason why he said that was that my grandfather, who grew up also in Chile, and he was also in Bolivia and Peru because my great-grandfather's job took them up into the Andes a lot. He graduated from that great agricultural school of the East, Harvard College. Graduated on Wednesday is the family lore, married my grandmother who was 18 on Thursday, and the ship set sail on Friday. And spent the rest of his life in Chile managing our farm because he was the only son and the oldest. And I think at some point he was like, I gotta make my own mark. And he had this idea of the cheddar cheese business. And and sometimes as an entrepreneur, you see an opportunity because something doesn't exist. And so you think like, well, I'm gonna go fill that space. Sometimes it doesn't exist because it's a terrible idea, right? Like the carrot juice in 1993 in San Francisco. So the cheddar cheese project was a disaster. We actually still have on our fireplace candles made of the wax, of the orange wax that went around it. And I think actually we should consider the cheese business again, it's just gonna take us a little bit, a while. He had some like grumpy cheese maker, monger from the UK, apologies. And, Angela.
He was probably making Cheshire instead of cheddar or
Some
something.
and Chileans, for those of you who've been to Chile don't like cheddar. They're starting to like, Líder carries it because were bought by Walmart, but really they like very low-key cheese. So, but our chefs actually, in our tasting salon, have fun playing with the fresh milk, and make different feta.
Good.
Yeah. Other questions?
Courtney,
Yes. Hi, Chet. I'm so glad you're here.
Have you paid a lot of attention to the chemistry of the soils where you grow grapes? And do you know that there are certain areas that produce better grapes than others? And is the chemistry of those soils known? Or is that part of your thoughts?
So it's a great question. There is a lot to be learned about soil and soil studies, and the best wineries and winemakers know their soils inside and out. I'm the lowly MBA, but I will share with you what I learned when we were first scouting out the hills and where we might plant, if at all, whether there was possibility. And remember, this is when we were in conversation with Kendall Jackson. They brought a Yale PhD, I think he went from poetry to dirt, and his nickname was Dr. Dirt. And we would dig these calicatas, which is like the backhoe would just dig a hole, like 6 feet deep. And then he would jump into it, and you'd sort of be like, is he okay down there? And then he'd go down with like a paper bag. This was in the mid-90s, I remember this. And then you would just hear from him down there, wow, or like some comment, right, about, this, and my uncle next to me, who's again more Spanish speaking than English, would say, eso aparentemente es un wow lugar, which means this apparently is a wow place. Who knew? But yes, soil studies are super important, and we didn't just poof plant the vineyard. There was a lot of investment in soil analysis, temperature analysis, aspect, light. That's what people call terroir, but it is both scientific and then there's some art in there too, but very, very important. Great question. Yes?
Courtney, I know that you and your family left Ladera for a year or so.
Yes, we
when
did.
they were little, and I was just talking to them. How have you incorporated your children into the family business? Have you?
Great question. Well, do you guys want to answer that? So we lived in Chile for a year when the girls were 8, 6, and 4. They're now 20, 16, and 18. And Andy was actually between companies at the time, and the year we were there, actually Andy ran the business for half the time, and I got a break. In terms of the next generation, you guys want to share what you do? I mean, basically, the idea is we moved there so that they could grow their own roots, right? For them to feel their own connection to Chile. You can't force it, you can't push it. It needs to come from within. And so we try to do that in a sort of soft, open hand way. And that's what that year was about. Otherwise they get paid to like sort inventory, tie ribbon. This is what their jobs when they were littler. Now they're all busy. Tie ribbons on sacacorchos. And someday Luisa jokes about she's going to open a cafe. But mostly the girls, I hope, in the next generation, which is the 5th generation, in general will not feel expected to be involved day to day, not feel that pressure, and at the same time also, this is important family business, like we're selected too. Like we don't just accept anybody come work with a family business. Like it's great, your family, but you might not have the chops. But the other thing is that to have the ability, like those mottos, I told you the don't bet the farm motto, right? There were two other mottos in the family. One was, ask not what the farm can do for you, but what can you do for the farm? So I mentioned this volunteerism, like whatever your gift is, you know, Annie is interested in physics. Maybe someday there's something that she can help us do. My nephew Niels actually works in cow power up in Bellingham, Washington. He works on the digesters that convert basically cow methane into power. He's quite, you know, there are things that people can do without needing to be involved on a day-to-day basis. The third motto is don't quit your day job. So the farm needs support, right? Like there are times when the price of milk is in the dump. There are times that things aren't going so well in the wine industry. There are times like a global pandemic when suddenly Chile is completely landlocked and nobody's coming for years. So I do pressure them to study Spanish and keep up their Spanish. They had to watch movies in Spanish for a long time.
Do you speak Spanish to them at home?
No. I think I tried and that they boycotted that. Yeah, great questions. Other questions? Yeah.
I heard that new generation doesn't drink as much wine as like other generations.
Yeah.
Do you see that changes?
Definitely. So right now, the global wine industry is going through a really tough time. There were probably multiple years of oversupply and then compounded by a fall in demand. So we have both you know, the New York Times and all sorts of studies coming out, not encouraging wine drinking, saying that it is just better to abstain. The next generation, as you said, is less interested. Maybe they're opting for White Claw or you know, something else. White Claw. And so, thankfully for us, our wines are tough to what I say substitute, right? Like they are wines that are based on experiences. Guests come and spend 4 hours with us on their way to Antarctica or their way to Patagonia coming back. And then they join our club and we become part of their memory of their trip and their experience with their loved ones. Our story becomes their story. The wines that I think are struggling the most are, you know, Cupcake, Skinny Bitch, you know, those bottles that, you know, you just sort of grab, that you maybe you're grabbing less these days. So that's a great question. How are we doing on time?
Maybe, I was just gonna say, maybe 2 more questions.
Okay, great.
Barbara had a question.
Barbara.
This is really quick, but you mentioned cork, so what's your thinking about screw caps?
Chantal and I were opening earlier. So the bottles over there are half are corked and half are screw caps. So we use screw caps for fresh wines. Most of our wines that are whites that we expect you to open probably on the sooner side, and our younger reds that we also think you'll be opening sooner. We are wines that we think you might wait a little bit and age a little longer. We use corks because they breathe and actually can help in the ageability. But there's also something called corked wines. Are you familiar with that? It's an interesting process, and I can't think of any other product in the world that has 2 to 8%, depending on who you talk to, of the product is flawed. And it is out of control of the winemaker. It doesn't have to do with how clean their winery is. It is a chemical reaction that happens between natural cork and wine. It's something called TCA. And that is why when you buy wine at a restaurant, for instance, the sommelier, the wine server, often will ask you to taste the wine first. It's not just to see if you like it, but it's also to see if it is corked. If you have a corked wine, by the way, what it does is it robs it of its fruit flavor, and it kind of smells like wet cardboard. So it is the kind of thing that sometimes if you're at a restaurant where they do have a wine director, ask them their opinion, right? And they can tell you if it's corked or not. But that bums me out, that like 2 to 8% of a bottle could be. So we have actually switched, there are a couple bottles over there in the last 5 years, we've switched to Diane corks, which are actually natural cork. That has been, the process is they actually have natural cork, and my understanding is that they split it, they make sure it has no TCA in it, and then they put it back together. And so TCA is no longer a problem, but it can still breathe in the bottle.
And what is that called again?
Corked wine,
No, not the cork wine, you said,
the bottle, or TCA,
No, the
No,
cork.
Diane.
the Diam, that's one of the brands, DIAM. Let me see actually if I can find.
okay, that's enough, I just
Yeah, it's
couldn't discern what I was hearing.
Yeah. It's the kind, actually I want to show you guys, I can pass it around. Okay, here we go. So, ready?
Thank you.
That is a Diam cork. And here, woo, sorry. Want me to throw another one? There you go. And that
here it
is
is, okay.
just a natural cork, original natural cork.
This is
So
the
we've
Diam, this is the
transitioned to the Diam, and then we use screw caps for their fresher wines. There's some amazing statistic that most people just enjoy wines, very soon after they buy it. They're not aging it. Yes, last question.
So if you go to a restaurant and they're not serving your wine, what do you order?
The question was, if I go to a restaurant and they're not serving Kingston wine, which is common, because again, we're mostly direct to consumer, what do I order? The first thing I do is I look at the wine list to see if it looks like it's been someone has curated it. If they put thought into it. And if it looks like it's interesting, that it's got some smaller producers or brands that I don't know, that aren't, bigger, then I am more willing to trust and excited to trust the chef or the sommelier, the wine director at the restaurant. And I actually often ask them. Right now I'm going through a phase. The best thing about wine is that you just get to do what you like, try different things, and it's always changing. And so right now I'm going through a phase of light, bright whites. Feels very festive for the holiday season. I think I hope there's not something that I haven't told you tonight, but this has just been such a joy. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being interested in our story. Thank you on behalf of Christ Church. Thank you to Voices of the Valley. Thank you for the big shoes that Barbara left for me to hop into after her Supreme Court talk. And